Usually when we talk about a system undergoing a stress test, there's this expectation of precision.
Right.
Like if you look at engineering or medicine, it's highly quantifiable.
Yeah, absolutely.
You break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor points to it and says, there's the fracture.
It's binary.
Exactly. It's binary. It's clean, and frankly, it's comforting because the damage is neatly categorized.
Well, it gives you a clear baseline for how to fix it, right? I mean, we are biologically wired to want that kind of visible, localized diagnosis.
Yeah, we really are. But when you step into the world of global geopolitics and this modern expansion of executive power, and especially the mechanics of the 2026 midterm elections,
Oh, man.
that X-ray machine is entirely broken.
Yeah.
I mean, we are looking at a systemic landscape where the fractures aren't clean lines. They're like millions of microscopic spider webs spreading across the entire structure.
Yeah, it's a mess.
It really is.
Yeah.
So today we are going on a deep dive into an absolute mountain of documents trying to map out exactly how murky things have become. On the table today, we've got a massive stack. We're looking at a 2026 election health check report by a group called Issue 1. We've got Wikipedia entries mapping out recent U.S. military deployments, financial primers from Morgan Stanley and J.P. Morgan, a White House fact sheet, an AI forecasting research paper from Art Sieve, and just a slew of recent news transcripts, including a broadcast from Mirror Now.
It is. I mean, it's a genuinely staggering amount of information to try to synthesize into one cohesive picture.
It really is.
Yeah.
And before we start threading all these needles, I want to establish some ground rules for our listeners, because this is important.
Yeah.
We are looking at a stack of sources today that contain highly charged political content, spanning both right-wing and left-wing viewpoints. We are navigating a, intensely polarized environment, and I want to be unequivocally clear here.
Right, we have to be.
Neither of us is taking a side today. We are not endorsing the viewpoints contained in these reports, or the political rhetoric, or the policy decisions. Our sole mission here is to impartially lay out the facts, the data, and the ideas exactly as they are presented in this original source material.
Just reading the data.
Right. So you can see the full board and understand the mechanics of what is actually happening.
Yeah, which is crucial, I mean, because the unifying thread connecting all these disparate sources, from a literal 2-hour war in South America to the AI algorithms we are feeding news to try and predict the stock market, is a fundamental stress test on the architecture of the American system itself.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that first thread sets the geopolitical tone for everything else happening in 2026.
Yeah. It really is.
The Wikipedia documentation outlines Operation Absolute Resolve.
Yeah.
So on January 3rd, 2026, the United States launched a direct military strike in Venezuela. And what is absolutely jarring here isn't just the intervention itself, but the sheer velocity of it.
Yeah.
This was one of the shortest armed conflicts in human history.
2 hours and 28 minutes.
Wait, really? 2.5 hours?
Yeah, from the initial breach of airspace to the primary objective being completely secured, 2 hours and 28 minutes.
I mean, how does a military apparatus dismantle a sovereign nation's defenses in under 3 hours? Like, what are the actual mechanics of a strike that fast?
Well, the reports detail a highly synchronized multi-domain approach. Like, this wasn't a traditional ground invasion that builds up over weeks, with troops at the border.
Right.
The U.S. utilized F-35 stealth fighters, combined with advanced electronic warfare capabilities to essentially blind the Venezuelan air defense grids instantaneously.
Oh, wow. So they just shut the grid down.
Exactly. With the radar architecture suppressed, Delta Force operators were able to execute these precision, localized strikes on key leadership compounds. It's the ultimate execution of modern kinetic warfare.
Speed and stealth.
Speed, stealth, and overwhelming localized force.
And the objective was the leadership, right? President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, were captured, immediately extracted to New York, and indicted on drug trafficking charges.
Right.
But an operation of this magnitude, no matter how surgically it's executed, it still leaves a footprint.
It does. It always does. The casualty reports vary slightly depending on the originating source, which is typical.
Sure.
But the median figures indicate at least 23 and potentially up to 47 Venezuelan military personnel were killed.
Okay.
The Cuban government also reported 32 of their own security personnel died in the engagement. And there were 2 confirmed civilian casualties.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, including a Colombian street vendor named Johanna Rodriguez Sierra.
Right. So the tactical objective is achieved in 2.5 hours. But looking at the Mirror Now broadcast transcript, the underlying strategic motive becomes incredibly transparent.
Yeah, it doesn't take long.
No. In the aftermath, Donald Trump is quoted remarking, to the victor belong the spoils. He even made this off-the-cuff joke about polling so high in Venezuela right now that he might go run for president down there. It moves very quickly from a law enforcement extraction to a massive economic repositioning.
Well, the economic motive is explicitly stated in the source material. Trump noted that securing access to Venezuelan oil was a foundational reason for the operation.
I mean, it's a huge shift.
Yeah, and look at the immediate policy dominoes that fell following the extraction of Maduro. The U.S. instantly secured a 50 million barrel oil deal.
50 million.
50 million. They lifted the standing sanctions on oil trade and forced privatization. Since that January 3rd strike, the administration has already collected over $13 billion in proceeds from Venezuelan oil sales.
Let's pause on that. $13 billion flowing back into the executive branch. Who is overseeing that capital?
Well, according to the reports, those proceeds are currently being collected without traditional financial or congressional oversight.
Wait, none.
None. And politically, Delcy Rodriguez, who is Maduro's vice president, was installed as the acting president. But the reporting indicates that the U.S. State Department, under Marco Rubio, essentially operates as a shadow government there.
Wow.
Yeah, exercising control over Venezuela's domestic finances, foreign policy, and natural resources.
You know, if the United States were a massive corporate conglomerate, this reads exactly like a hostile takeover.
Oh, totally.
You swoop in, you acquire a struggling company through aggressive leverage, fire the old CEO, install an internal proxy, and your CFO immediately starts liquidating the most valuable assets to recoup the investment.
That is exactly what it looks like on paper.
But on a global stage, how is the rest of the world reacting to this new brand of executive action? Like, who are the other shareholders watching this happen?
The immediate reaction, predictably, came from the UN and international law scholars. They universally condemned the raid as a violation of the UN Charter and Venezuelan sovereignty.
Right, which you'd expect.
Exactly. But what the sources reveal is that this Venezuelan operation isn't an isolated incident, it's a blueprint. The executive branch is currently applying the same aggressive, unilateral leverage across multiple global choke points simultaneously.
We see this reflected in the trade data too, right?
Yeah.
And the White House fact sheets. It's not just military force. It's economic warfare used as a blunt instrument.
Precisely. You have the president claiming that U.S. pressure alone forced India's Prime Minister Modi to halt Russian oil purchases.
Okay.
You have a sudden White House emergency declaration specifically targeting phosphate fertilizer from Morocco.
Which creates instant supply chain ripples.
Massive ones. And then, according to a legal analysis by Gibson Dunn, you have this incredibly volatile environment of worldwide tariffs causing massive market disruptions, juxtaposed with last-minute closed-door deals.
Right, like the Canadian tariff thing.
Exactly. The sudden delay of a 50% U.S. tariff on Canadian imports just as it was about to hit. The executive branch is essentially overriding traditional diplomatic channels and utilizing direct economic threats to achieve immediate compliance.
So if that is the velocity of the executive branch's global strategy, moving billions of dollars in military assets overnight, it begs the question of how that philosophy translates domestically.
Yeah.
We are looking down the barrel of the 2026 midterms. How does an administration accustomed to acting with that level of unchecked global authority begin to handle domestic law enforcement and local jurisdictions?
Well, the Mirror Now broadcast transcripts provide a pretty direct answer to that.
Okay.
The rhetoric and the deployment of federal power domestically are really beginning to mirror the international strategy.
How so?
The broadcasts highlight swirling rumors of a potential nationwide lockdown.
A lockdown?
Yeah, paired with very pointed directives from the administration about surging federal law enforcement to bypass local authorities and combat domestic crime directly.
Right. The transcript specifically points to the FBI and DOJ. They managed to capture the alleged assassin of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk in 33 hours.
Right.
And the president used that as a primary talking point. He contrasted this 33-hour manhunt with the search for the Boston bomber, who he referred to in the source as Luigi Mannion.
Yeah, he pointed out that local and federal coordination took 5 days back then.
So the administration is actively selling this concept of hyper-efficiency, arguing that only a consolidated, top-down federal police force gets results. But mechanistically, what does this surge actually look like on the ground? I mean, you can't just drop the FBI into a street corner in Chicago without a framework.
Well, you can if you aggressively reinterpret federal authority.
Yeah, okay.
The funded strategy involves surging what the administration calls strong, good people, patriots, into
Wow.
cities like Chicago and Memphis. Legally, this happens through the expansion of federal task forces, the deputization of local officers under federal jurisdiction, and leveraging federal grants. The administration noted that the head of Union Pacific literally begged them to save Chicago due to rail theft.
Oh, wow.
So they are using corporate appeals and crime statistics to justify bypassing mayors and governors. They are even utilizing economic blackmail.
The FIFA thing.
Yes, threatening to move the FIFA World Cup games out of host cities like Boston if local leaders don't, quote, do their job and comply with federal policing dictates.
And it extends beyond law enforcement into crisis management, too. The sources point out Governor Braun activating the National Guard and the administration swiftly approving federal aid for the Indiana floods.
Right.
The executive branch is positioning itself as the ultimate immediate lever for all domestic issues, just bypassing the slow grind of the legislative branch entirely.
Which brings us to the most volatile intersection in our source material.
Yeah.
You have an executive branch that has consolidated immense power, accustomed to utilizing rapid action levers both globally and domestically. What happens when that machinery is pointed directly at the decentralized, highly vulnerable mechanics of the American voting system?
Here's where it gets really interesting, right? Because if you look at the Pew Research Center data in our stack, voters are entirely focused on the economy heading into the 2026 midterms.
Of course they are.
That's the dinner table conversation. But looking at the Issue 1 report, which is titled The 2026 Election Health Check, the actual administrative plumbing of the election itself is the real story here. The economy is what people are voting on, but whether the vote itself can physically be executed is what these experts are terrified about.
Yeah, the authors of the Issue 1 report use a very precise medical analogy to describe the situation.
Patient thing.
Exactly. They view the American decentralized election system, so the poll workers, the local county clerks, the state boards, they view that as a resilient patient that is currently trying to fight off the virus of democratic backsliding. Historically, the federal executive branch acted as a vitamin for this patient. It provided funding, cybersecurity oversight, and logistical support to strengthen the immune system of the voting process.
But the report argues that in 2026, that dynamic has inverted. The executive branch isn't the vitamin anymore. It has become the virus, actively attacking the system's 9 key safeguards from within.
Right.
And to understand why the executive branch is taking this aggressive internal posture, we have to look at what happened in Congress.
The legislative logjam.
Exactly. The Senate went into recess without passing the Save America Act.
Yeah.
Now, for our listeners who might not be deep into congressional procedure, this was the bill designed to mandate strict federal voter ID and require physical proof of citizenship to register. The reports indicate the president demanded the Senate cancel their August break entirely to pass it.
He even demanded they terminate the legislative filibuster.
Which is a huge deal.
It is a massive escalation because the filibuster is the rule requiring 60 votes to advance legislation in the Senate. If you terminate the filibuster, a simple majority of 51 votes can pass almost anything.
But the Senate didn't yield, they didn't pass the act, and they didn't kill the filibuster. So the executive branch, lacking the legislative mandate, pivoted to the exact same strategy they are using globally: internal agency leverage and brute administrative force.
Right.
They are trying to achieve the goals of the stalled Save America Act through sheer executive pressure.
And the granular examples Issue 1 lays out are terrifying if you care about institutional stability.
Yeah.
We are talking about FEMA, the Emergency Management Agency, allegedly threatening to withhold terrorism prevention funds from individual states unless those states comply with the administration's specific election priorities.
That's intense.
It gets worse. We are looking at CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is supposed to protect our voting machines from foreign hacking. The report says they're being entirely gutted by staff reassignments. The report highlights that CISA hasn't performed a single gap analysis on election security infrastructure since October 2025.
Wait, what does a gap analysis actually entail?
It's essentially a vulnerability scan. You look for the gaps in the cyber defenses of local voting machines to see where hackers could get in. Without it, you're flying blind.
I see.
And just to cap it off, the remaining members of the Election Assistance Commission were dismissed right before the midterms.
Furthermore, it escalates from administrative defunding to the active deployment of federal law enforcement. We discussed the surge of DOJ and FBI power earlier. Well, That surge is being applied to the election.
Yes.
The DOJ is actively sending letters threatening state election officials with federal prosecution over non-citizen voting, which the report notes is already illegal at the state level and statistically exceedingly rare.
Right.
We are seeing FBI raids executed on voter organizing groups in Ohio and Maricopa County, Arizona. In California, the pressure has reached the local level, where a Riverside County sheriff utilized his authority to physically seize ballots.
But, we should point out that the safeguards are holding, at least in some arenas. The Issue 1 report calls the courts stable but under stress.
Okay, I have to challenge this premise, though, because they point to the DOJ's track record as proof of systemic resilience. They note that the DOJ is currently 0-21 in lawsuits, where they attempted to acquire unredacted voter rolls from states.
Right, 0 for 21.
Now, the report paints this as a victory for the safeguards. But if I'm a local county clerk and I get sued 21 times by the infinite resources of the federal government, I am bankrupt. I am exhausted. Doesn't the sheer volume of these federal lawsuits suggest the system isn't actually resilient, but rather it's being bled dry by legal fees and intimidation? Like a 0-21 record isn't a resilient system, it's a siege.
That is a phenomenal distinction to make. You were absolutely right. Winning a lawsuit against the DOJ is still a devastating loss of localized time and resources. The resilience the report points to is strictly constitutional. The judges are holding the line on privacy, but the friction is the point. The federal strategy isn't necessarily to win lawsuits. It is to paralyze the state apparatus with the process of defending them.
I see.
Though we are seeing states countermaneuver,
Yep.
5 Democratic-led states have passed specific legislative shields to create buffer zones against federal interference and protect mail-in ballot infrastructure.
Okay.
And notably, this isn't purely partisan. 5 Republican-led states have also openly refused the Trump DOJ's demands for data, citing their own state constitutional authority and deep concerns over federal overreach into data privacy.
So you have this massive constitutional collision happening in real time. But as a voter trying to understand where this ends up, you turn to the media and you hit a wall of total cognitive dissonance.
Oh, it's brutal.
Let's look at the sources regarding the rumors of an emergency order to control the election. If you watch SBS News or read the CNN Wire, they are reporting that Trump won't rule out declaring a national emergency ahead of the midterms.
Okay, a possibility.
Right. But then you flip over to the democracy docket, and they are claiming unequivocally that an emergency order is actively being prepared by his allies.
Wow.
And then you check PBS News, and they report the exact opposite, that Trump is explicitly not mulling a draft executive order to seize control. How on earth is a listener, a citizen, supposed to navigate this exact kind of contradictory news environment? It is impossible to find ground truth.
It is the defining vulnerability of the modern information era. When the executive branch operates with sweeping, unprecedented authority, the media apparatus fractures, attempting to parse intent from rhetoric.
Yeah.
We do see the legislative branch attempting to build physical guardrails into the law based on these exact fears.
Oh.
Senator Alex Padilla just introduced a new bill designed specifically to counter executive attacks on federal elections.
Right.
We are also seeing the reintroduction of the Article 1 Act by Steve Cohen and Chip Roy, which is a bipartisan attempt to rein in the president's ability to declare national emergencies in the first place.
But legislation takes months, if not years, and we are dealing with immediate looming impacts. Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan are issuing financial primers warning of massive stock market volatility tied to this exact political uncertainty.
Oh yeah, the markets hate this.
We as a society despise uncertainty. We want the clean X-ray, which logically shifts our focus to the final source in our stack. If the human media ecosystem is fractured and the legislative branch is too slow, can artificial intelligence cut through the noise? Like, can an advanced LLM analyze all these disparate data points and accurately predict what is actually going to happen?
That is the exact question researchers tackled in the ArcSIF paper titled Future is Unevenly Distributed.
Such a good title.
It is. They wanted to see if AI could act as a reliable oracle. They evaluated several highly advanced large language models, specifically GPT-5, Claude 3.7, and DeepSeek R1.
Okay.
They tested these models on their forecasting abilities using thousands of prediction market questions pulled from platforms like Polymarket and Metaculus.
So they're feeding the AI specific time-bounded questions, like, will this tariff be enacted by Friday, or will this candidate drop out by November?
Exactly. But what's fascinating here is their second experiment. The researchers wanted to measure the impact of context. What happens when you feed the AI factual, real-time news articles to help it make its prediction?
I mean, you would naturally assume that feeding a supercomputer more factual data, giving it the news from this week, would vastly improve its accuracy.
You would assume that, but the results were stunningly counterintuitive.
Really?
Providing news context did help the AI predict outcomes in heavily quantifiable sectors like finance, politics, and sports.
Okay.
However, injecting news actually severely hurt the AI's accuracy in the categories of entertainment, technology, and specifically geopolitics.
That is wild. The very thing we are struggling to understand, geopolitical moves like the Venezuelan extraction or global tariffs, is the exact category where giving an AI the news makes it dumber?
Yes.
Why does more information degrade the model's logic?
The researchers isolated 3 specific systemic failure modes when these advanced AI models consume human news: recency bias, definition drift, and rumor overweighting.
Let's break those down because I think they apply to a lot more than just the AI.
Yeah.
How does recency bias corrupt the model?
Let's use a specific financial example from the study. The AI was asked to predict if the S&P 500 would close above the 6,100 mark.
Okay.
Now, based purely on historical market data, volatility indexes, and foundational statistics, the AI correctly predicted a mean reversion. It calculated that the market was overheated and would naturally cool down.
So a sound, mathematically defensive bet.
Exactly. But then the researchers fed the AI the context window of that day's news.
Uh-oh.
The AI ingested a handful of highly optimistic, sensationalized headlines from financial blogs. It allowed the noise of those recent loud headlines to completely override its foundational statistical logic. And it suddenly flipped its prediction, making a highly overconfident and ultimately incorrect bet that the market would break out above 6,100. It suffered from recency bias. It valued the loudest, newest information over the most reliable data.
Okay, what about definition drift?
Definition drift happens when an AI is fed nuanced geopolitical journalism, and it fundamentally loses the thread of what constitutes an event.
How do you mean?
If the AI is asked to predict if a war will start, and it reads 50 articles debating the definition of kinetic strikes, special operations, and armed conflict, the model's internal definition of the word war becomes so muddled that it can no longer accurately measure the probability of the event occurring.
Ah, I see.
It drowns in the semantic arguments of the journalists.
And rumor overweighting.
This is perhaps the most dangerous. Rumor overweighting occurs when an AI processes social media integration or aggregated news. If a completely baseless rumor is repeated by 1,000 different low-tier news outlets, the AI's algorithm registers the high frequency of the claim and falsely assigns it a high probability of being true.
Oh, man.
It conflates the viral spread of an idea with the factual reality of the idea.
And this is where all of our sources violently collide. We look back at the Issue 1 report, and it explicitly states that the human information ecosystem is currently in critical condition.
Right.
It documents how human voters are increasingly abandoning traditional, verifiable news sources and replacing them with unreliable AI chatbots to get their voting information. It also notes that Russian phishing campaigns are actively cloning legitimate local media sites to pump disinformation into these exact networks.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, if we pull back and look at the entire board we've mapped out today, we are watching the deployment of unprecedented executive power.
Yeah.
We see it reshaping the globe in a 2-hour military strike in Venezuela, and we see it reshaping domestic life through the aggressive surging of federal law enforcement into local jurisdictions. Simultaneously, the decentralized safeguards of our election administration are straining under immense institutional and legal pressure. And at the exact moment in history when we desperately need clarity to navigate this stress test, our primary tools for discovering the truth, both our fractured human media ecosystem and our highly advanced AI forecasting models, are proving deeply vulnerable to rumor, semantic noise, and algorithmic bias.
The X-ray isn't just blurry. The doctor is holding 3 conflicting charts. The hospital is being sued, and the machine itself is actively hallucinating based on rumors it read on the internet.
That's a terrifying way to put it, but accurate.
It is a profoundly unsettling landscape. Which leaves me with a final lingering thought for everyone listening to this deep dive to really sit with.
That's the thought.
We just spent time analyzing how an incredibly advanced supercomputing AI models with billions of parameters like GPT-5 or Claude 3.7 have their logic completely corrupted by recency bias and rumor overweighting the second you feed them real-time news about geopolitics and technology.
Yeah.
They abandon their foundational logic because the headlines are too loud. So my question is, are we, as human voters, suffering from the exact same algorithmic failure?
Oh, that's a good question.
Right. When we scroll our feeds, watch conflicting broadcasts, and absorb the absolute chaos of the 2026 political landscape, are we just as easily manipulated out of our own foundational logic as we prepare to head into the voting booth this November?
I mean, it's hard not to wonder.
I want you to answer that specific question in the comment section below. Do you think human cognition is currently failing the same way AI cognition is failing when it comes to processing the news? We read every single comment, and seeing how you synthesize these massive geopolitical deep dives really helps guide where we take this show next.
Absolutely.
And look, if you value this kind of unbiased, long-form analysis where we actually read the source material and lay out the mechanics of how the world works, please hit that like button and make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you never miss a video.
It really helps.
It really does. Yeah. Engaging with the video doesn't just support the deep dive. It is the exact metric that tells the YouTube algorithm that real people find this factual, rigorous content valuable. And when the algorithm knows that, it pushes this information out to educate and inform thousands of other learners who are trying to make sense of the noise, just like you.
Exactly.
We have covered a massive amount of territory today, from the airspace over Venezuela to the Senate filibuster, all the way to the internal logic of artificial intelligence. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you on the next one.